good to see you all. Some of you I have not seen in a long time, too long a time. But I'm here to welcome you to the Delmarva Council Special Recognition Event honoring Bill Whisler. My name is Bruce Simmons. I know most of you, but not all. My job will be to speak as little as possible, but certainly to introduce speakers this evening. There is an agenda up here, generally giving who the speakers are, and just a little bit of their background. They're welcome to elaborate on their own backgrounds. It should be of interest to people. Let's begin with a pledge to the flag, if we could. Please stand, right hand salute or hand over heart. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We do not have a printed program, nothing to carry around and look at. We do have some information about Bill on a bookmark. And everyone is entitled to take a bookmark or two, whatever you will use in terms of bookmarks, either this afternoon or certainly when you leave. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Pat Weaver for arranging Troop 24 to come and tie some knots for us and to watch some of Bill's magic with knot tying. It was fun. Thank you. Round of applause. Hey, Cub Scout influence. I love it. Thank you, Barb. So we have several speakers this evening honoring Bill's long and deep service to scouting. They're going to give some remarks. They're going to talk a bit about his background. They're also, I've asked them to make it personal where they can and where they want to. I think of this event, I think of Bill particularly as the analogy to a pebble thrown in a pond, and the ripples go out, and they go out, and they go beyond where anyone can imagine, certainly can't measure. And I think of Bill's career much in that vein. First speaker is Steve Small. Steve, if you'd come up. Steve is Council Commissioner and will give us a little bit of Bill's background and his thoughts.
Thanks, Bruce. I'll get my glasses out too. I see a lot of glasses these days, so that's okay. As a member of the Council Key 3, it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to this event. A couple of shout outs. I see, like Bruce, there's a lot of folks I know and some I don't know, but I think we have our Scout Executive, Robert Nakagawa, he's with us today. We have one, well, I thought we were only have one out of council, we have several now. Ken Davis, you're right here in the front, great. Some long-term Delmarva Scouters that are now out of council will come visit with us today. Dawn Jens, Barb Hicklin, thanks for coming. Thanks for coming. And I also want to recognize Dave Short for his leadership in putting this event together. It's awesome. And the rest of the committee. Could you guys kind of identify yourselves and folks that were on the committee? So we can feel free to harass them later. It's fine. So I also want to thank everyone for supporting the youth of Delmarva. As a commissioner, I realize that a rich and robust youth program at our units attracts and retains youth in our program. All of us can help build a better program at our units by supporting world-class training, and we have no better advocate for training in Delmarva than our friend and mentor, Bill Whisler. For nearly a decade and a half, the Delmarva Council has been developing Anchorage Scout Reservation, and we've come a long way. From that groundbreaking ceremony in that farmer's field to the very first council jamboree where we camped out on a freshly seeded field, while Ray Teat tried to fill that big lake with a garden hose. One of the many visions for the property is for it to be the council's training center. And to date, we've held many training events there, including 5 wood badge courses. We're here tonight to move that process forward. By securing the naming rights, we begin the process of building a permanent space for the council's training center. As we continue to review and revise the master plan for the property, one thing has remained constant, that Acreage will be the volunteer center for our council. Now let's take a few minutes to talk about our honoree and his 82 years of service to Scouting. Before we do that though, I'd like everyone to take a moment and think back to your first encounter with Bill. For me, that was 2001. I was a brand new assistant wolf den leader and had been harassed into taking Introduction to Outdoor Leader Skills by none other than Barb Hicklin. And I was brand new back into the program. My camping equipment was what you would call suspect. So Friday night I'm moving into camp. As I walk up to the Henson admin building, I see this tall, slender figure with his bait and pow hat on, standing on the porch, watching me. So I'm walking in to camp for a long weekend with all my gear in a cardboard box. It was raining. I had forgotten my raincoat. But Bill was just shaking his head at me, another Cub Scout leader. I could hear him now. Bill joined Scouts as a youth in 1937 in Peru, Indiana, at age 10. Now when I read that, I was like, wow, 10. So I Googled it right quick. You know, you had to be 12 back then to join Scouting. Now Bill has always been a stickler for the rules. I don't know if you all have noticed that, but not so much in 1937 though. Regardless, he earned his Eagle in December of 1942 and followed it up with 4 palms. He remained active in his troop until Army service began in 1945. He was deployed to Germany as an NP in the aftermath of World War II. In the years that I've known Bill, I've heard many stories about his time there. He married his high school sweetheart, Katie, and they built a family including 3 children. All were active in Scouting. Their son became an Eagle Scout. Bill served as a Scout Master, a Cub Master, and a committee member in 4 units in our council. Less than a year ago, he called me about starting a new unit at his place of worship. Now, I'm not sure what role he was going to take on, but maybe we could add it to that list. He's held a number of district and council positions since 1952, including a member of the council training committee, where he served as a chairman for 19 years. He earned his Wood Badge in 1962 and served as a council Wood Badge coordinator from 1963 to 2020. He serves as a mentor to the current Wood Badge coordinator. He served on staff at the first experimental leadership development Wood Badge course at Shift Scout Reservation in 1967. Bill was responsible for implementing Wood Badge in our council, as well as numerous other councils in the Northeast and the Southern regions. In 1974, Bill led a Wood Badge course director seminar at Philmont Scout Ranch. He was instrumental in bringing the 21st Century Wood Badge to Delmarva in 2000. Bill was a member of the council executive board for 37 years and remains an active member of the advisory board of the Delmarva Council. He's been an active part in more than 100 Wood Badge courses, including my own. Now, as Bruce mentioned earlier, Bill has had a recent birthday. Thursday, I believe, right, Bill? So in a time-honored scouting tradition. I think we should help Bill celebrate and sing happy birthday. So you can all stand up. We'll sing happy birthday to Bill. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Bill. Happy birthday to you. There's more.
That is on Facebook, but she didn't tell her age.
Are you?
I'm not going to tell it.
Oh, you're not. No, are you going to tell your age?
I want to live.
Oh, okay. All right, a couple of last minute things.
It's interesting to see some of these pictures where I still had dark black hair, I guess. And like a lot of others, I have to put on my reading glasses as well. So why are we gathered here tonight? How did this all get started? Well, about 2 years ago, Ray Teat asked me to recruit and to chair a committee to help develop funding for a council training center to be named in honor of Bill Whisler. Now that's something that I and a lot of others have been quietly proposing for a few years. As you may guess, I responded positively to Ray. So what are these naming rights that I think Steve mentioned and others? Well, it's kind of in a manner similar to naming a building on a college campus or a university campus in honor of a great scholar or an alumnus or something like that. When the Council Properties Committee completed planning for Ackridge, that was probably 10 years ago or so, they established certain levels of giving that would entitle a particular building or a portion of the reservation to be named in honor of someone. At that time, each such naming opportunity was associated with a certain level of financial donation. And by the way, I understand that there are still opportunities out there, if those of you are interested in that sort of thing, at other camps. As I mentioned, Ray Teat's request occurred about 2 years ago, but then COVID-19 happened. And many things, including this effort, were suspended temporarily anyway. Thus, we only began the development of a funding effort in earnest early this year, when I began recruiting the members of the organizing committee. So the following distinguished scouters agreed to participate in this effort. I'll read off their names, kind of let people know who you are, raise your hand, whatever. Dick Foskett, Stuart Johnson, hold your applause till the end. Nancy Jones, Todd Kramer, Bill Murdoch, Pat Press, Jamie Pyle, Bill Short, who was early on involved with this, Dave Short, Bruce Simmons, Steve Small, Bob Stakowitz, and Pat Weaver. And in particular, Dick Foskett took on the responsibility for organizing the physical arrangements for this event. Stuart Johnson for the publicity overall, and Bruce Simmons for the program. So those folks, all those folks, I'd like you to give a round of applause. I'd like to thank every one of them for their many contributions, both physical and financial, I might add, to making this happen. All have pledged or have already supported this capital campaign financially. So it's my distinct pleasure to announce that with the help of that committee and with the help of most of you in this audience, the Delmarva Council will create a council training center at Ackridge Scout Reservation as part of the build-out of the permanent facilities at Ackridge. That future training center will be named the William Bill Whisler Training Center. We set our fundraising target for that center at $150,000. You'd be pleased to know that as of this evening, we have received a combination of pledges and outright gifts totaling approximately $108,000. So thank you all for your help, and there's always more opportunities. Okay, I'd like to share a few additional thoughts about Bill Whisler. First off, many of you know that Bill contributed in many ways to training in this council over many years, many of which were outlined by our council commissioner, Steve Small. I want to highlight that Bill also had a substantial role in the development of certain national training programs, particularly the preeminent adult training, Scouter training program known as Wood Badge. Specifically, Bill had a major role in the design and rollout of Boy Scout Leadership Development Wood Badge in the late 1960s and early 70s. This course changed the focus of Wood Badge from a predominantly Scoutcraft-oriented program to leadership development. The focus has been carried forward in subsequent upgrades and evolutions of that Wood Badge course. You will learn more about this from Dr. Ken Davis, who's going to talk a little bit later in the program. I'd also like to share some personal reflections about Bill. As a result of working with him for, 30 years or something like that. The first time I met Bill, I was asked to be a staff member for the Back to Wood Badge reunion held at Rodney Scout Reservation in 1985. Maybe some of you in this audience were there. I also met a guy named Dave Ferris there, among other Delmarva Council training luminaries of the time. Perhaps I did something right, I don't know. Although I wasn't certain of that at the time, but at the closing of the event, in one of those after the meeting meetings out in the parking lot, yeah, a few of you remember those things, Bill and Dave pulled me aside. Ostensibly, they wanted to get to know me better and discuss Wood Badge. Well, I'd only become active in the Delmarva Council approximately 3 years before this, having completed at that time an advanced degree at the University of Delaware. So at the time, this seemed like a positive thing to me. Yeah, well, little did I know that I was being set up, all right? Afterwards, there were numerous evenings at Bill's house discussing the philosophy of training in general and Wood Badge in particular. Within a year, I was asked by Ed Brooks to serve for the first time on a Wood Badge course. That course was NE 610. Furthermore, Ed asked me to be the senior patrol leader for that course, which was quite a challenge since it had been 13 years and 3 different councils since I participated in the course. But as a result of my experience on that course, and to this day, the senior patrol leader role is my favorite in Wood Badge. Another never-to-be-forgotten experience in my interactions with Bill Whisler occurred several years later, during the rollout of the revised version of the Wood Badge course in 2000. That was a course known to many of you as Wood Badge for the 21st century. At that time, I was serving once again in the role of senior patrol leader, but this time it was as a staff member for the Northeast Region's Wood Badge Course Directors Conference, which was held in those days at the Alpine Scout Reservation of New York area councils. We were nearing the end of the conference, and I had been tapped to present the session entitled Leaving a Legacy. Now, many of you who have taken Wood Badge in the last 15 to 20 years will recall that session, which employs clips from Mr. Holland's opus. Mr. Holland, played by the actor Richard Dreyfuss, is retiring as chairman of the music department at his high school because funding is tight and the budget for the music program has been cut. The other details of this session aren't material here. Anyway, at some point in that presentation, I briefly mentioned the impact that Bill Whisler had had on me and the impact of his legacy on training in general in the Delmarva Council. Bill was in the audience, as was Linda Cotton, who I believe was present because she was the designated course director for the next course. The next thing I knew, Bill was walking rapidly forward from the back of the room. My first thought was, oh my, I have really screwed up here now, haven't I? Bill, you don't have to get up right now, okay? What Bill did next was to take over the stage and proceed to compliment me and Linda and to point out the importance of high standards in training youth and adults and the importance in planning for the evolution and succession in training staff development. These are the bare facts as well as I can recall them because quite frankly I was in a state of shock, okay? But the manner and the words that Bill used resulted in there being very few dry eyes in the audience, and certainly not in Linda's or mine. So I want to personally thank you, Bill, and for all you've given me, and for all that you've given a council. You have certainly left a legacy. Just look around the room. To your continued good health, my friend.
The audio is done and the visual is done, so we're in good shape. I'd like to introduce to you someone you may not know, or very few of you know, Ken Davis. Ken came down and joined the staff of the experimental wood badge course already mentioned. It was 1/8 in the year 2000. Among his other accomplishments, and I'll let Ken describe what he would like about his background and accomplishments, the one I'd like to mention is that he found time 5 years ago or more to write the definitive book, The History of Wood Badge in the United States. It's still available. Internet's a wonderful source of that sort of thing. Ken, would you please?
Do you have extra copies?
Not with me, and I don't get any money from it. It was supposedly a 2-hour drive. I was afraid it would be rain, and so I was here early. Because of all the people I would drive away to spend some time talking about it, talking with and visiting with. Bill Whisler's at the top of my list, and I'll tell you why in a minute. Now, what you've set yourself up for, and you got only Dave Short to blame for this. I trained as a historian. In fact, ran my first wood badge course when I was in graduate school at the University of Virginia back in 1973. And when you're trained as a historian, it's a requirement that you speak in 50-minute blocks. So, don't get mad at me. This is kind of what I was trained to do, and it's ingrained. A couple things, and this will be a little bit disjointed because I kept making notes and it doesn't necessarily all fit together. But one of the things is you might want to know about the book. If you're a wood badger, and nearly everybody in the room is a wood badger, this was originally a book in 1988, and I finally got the BSA to say we ought to update this. The date on this is 2018. You can find it very easily, not through your Scout Service Center or Scout Shop, because it is a print-on-demand book. But if you remember the title, A History of Wood Badge in the United States, you Google that, it will take you directly to the publisher who will sell you a copy for 20 bucks. The information in it is pretty good. Some of it in here is about Bill Whisler. As a matter of fact, there's a picture on page 59 that he wanted to be sure we had, and we do need it because it is the picture of the course he mentioned, or somebody mentioned, that was held in You just mentioned it, Bill. 1967, June 1967 at Schiff was the course that set off the other courses that led to leadership development 5 years later. And I'll give you some more details about that. But on page 59 of the book, Bill Whisler is sitting down on the front row along with other key people who ran those courses in 5 and 6 other councils. So it's worth having. They did get it mostly right. I shouldn't pick on him, but our last Chief Scout executive, before he resigned, at least went to bat with the editorial people and said, "Will you quit bugging Davis and telling him he has to make changes when he wrote what is true and you don't have any reason to change it?" So what I put in here is pretty much what I know to be true, and if you don't like any of it, it's my fault. So you can yell at me later. But let me just tell you, you've heard about Bill and the leadership development business. And let me just say up front, my few pages of comments are all built around this. Boy Scouts of America training changed when everybody was required to do leadership development wood badge in the year 1973. Changed for a couple of reasons, not the least of which was the Chief Scout executive at the time, Alden Barber, said, "This is a great course," and he was a 4B'er, a course director, "and I want every council to get involved in this." So that's one of the reasons I ended up being a course director at 31 or 32, because there were 4 small councils over in the Shenandoah Valley, in Hagerstown and Winchester and Stanton and Roanoke, who couldn't do a course by themselves. But if we got all 4 of us together, we could. So that's kind of what happened. Now, some facts I'll just throw out as we go along. I heard somebody, Bill or somebody was mentioning earlier about beads, and the question always comes up, and if you haven't heard this, let me just put it to rest. When you get your wood badge, you get 2 beads. If you get to serve on a course, you're given 3 beads to wear. If you're given authority to run a course and be a course director, you're given 4 beads. And we always heard years ago, and it's in the early part of this book, that the camp director at Gilwell Park in England wears 6. So what happens to 5? The answer is, and I know this for a fact because we had a professional years ago when I was working at Philmont who was the director of volunteer training. And I asked him, I said, "Mr. Lawrence, why do we have anybody that wears 5 beads?" And he says, "No." He said, "In most scouting associations, the national trainer professional wears 5 beads. I have 4 beads and I run courses like other people. I don't see any need to wear 5 beads. We won't have 5 beads." Now that's true, with one exception. And this is a little tidbit you can take home and bore your wife or your kids with. There is one person and his beads are on display. We all know the story of Green Bar Bill, who was Mr. Wood Badge and Mr. BP really in this BSA for years and years and years, because he had known BP, he had worked with people from Gilwell Park. He was our first Wood Badge course director in 1948, and he believed in scoutcraft skills and running things the way BP wanted it to be done. So he was off and on, he was originally from Denmark, so off and on he traveled around to scouting events, world jamborees and other events around the world. And at some point, somebody on the national, the World Organization of Scouting said, "You know, Bill, we still have a few beads left from the original Denny Zulu string that Baden Powell got in Africa, and we're trying to be sure there's one of these in every country that has a wood badge program. And you're the most famous one from the United States, so here's a bead." Now, nobody told him he could represent the United States. Nobody in the United States told him he could do it. Nobody really cared. Bill stuck that 5th bead on his set of 4. And so there will be people who will say, "Yeah, but Bill Hillcourt wore 5 beads." And the answer is yes, he did, but he kind of wasn't blessed, and we really don't care. And if you think that story's made up, the next time you go to Philmont, look at the wood badge and Bill Hillcourt display in the museum, and you will see the 5 beads. So that's the story of beads if you ever wanted to hear it. Okay, the next most important thing for you to know about why Bill Whisler was so important to me is I discovered after a brief encounter that he was, bless his soul, a fox. And since I was a fox, that pretty well sealed the whole deal. So anyway, I first met Bill when I was asked to run a course over in Shenandoah Valley. It was hosted at the Camp Rock Eden, I'm sure many of you know. And we had 45 people, and we had staff and participants from the 4 council. It worked out well. But my first introduction to Bill was a little bit before that. He reminded me a few minutes ago that there was an area meeting in 1971 in which we met. And at that point, we weren't thinking about Wood Badge in Stonewall Jackson Area Council. But in any case, eventually, Stonewall Jackson got together, and not many people in those councils had served on Wood Badge, so it's a little hard to come up with staff. But there is a definite Delmarva connection to this, because at the time, I was a district training chairman and helping with Jamboree. And my wife's wondering why she's teaching school when I'm supposed to be in graduate school, and I'm playing Boy Scout. And so we get ready to do this, and these 4 councils are going to have a meeting to decide if we're going to do a course, and if so, who will host it, and then who's going to be the course director. Well, guess who is my district executive? And this is a name probably only Bill and I know in this room. But by that time, in 1972, Delmarva had been doing a lot of this. And one of the people who they'd gotten involved was a district executive. And by the time I'm in graduate school and we're talking about a course in the Valley, John Cadwallader, who is a Wood Badge course director from Delmarva, is sitting in a meeting saying, you know, I really think Ken Davis is the most experienced person. You ought to let him do that. So you guys get all the credit. You can argue with other people about whether I ever learned to run a course, but I have a great and fond connection with Delmarva in a lot of ways. My scout troop has come to Rodney and to Henson a bunch of times. I've spent a lot of time with Dave Short and Ray Teat and Ray Appler when he used to do camp assessments. So have a great feeling for you guys. So the main point I want to make here, and I'll give you a few details, but the main point I want to make here is there were essentially five councils in 1967 who bought into, yes, we will help do this. Now, get Bill to tell you this story sometime because it's a little bit of a lengthy one. What they did was they picked councils that had good training experience, and clearly Delmarva was at the top of that. Nashville, Tennessee, Dallas, Texas, Gastonia, North Carolina, Syracuse, all of those were experimental councils. Now think about this. You need a core of people who like training and can commit to do this over several years. They ended up putting on a course in each council once a year for 5 years. And at the end of every one, there was at least one person whose main job it was to make notes and to figure out what we want to include and what we want to work on changing. So every course the next year was a different course. And you got to figure that was pretty hard and took a lot of time and effort. Now, of those 5 councils and those people, and I knew most of them over the course of other times, and they were good scouters. But I don't believe, my take is they did the best they could. They did a good job. They gave a lot of feedback. The course was improved every year. And then all of a sudden, they weren't quite ready, but Chief Scout Executive Alden Barber says, this is the time to do it because we're changing the number of regions. We're putting out some new Boy Scout level programs. We're going to have Wood Badge. Everybody does it, starting in '73. And as I see it, Bill was the exact right person to understand and to focus on this for a couple reasons. And he would tell you there's other reasons, or maybe I didn't quite hear it right. But first of all, by the time you get to the level of working at an upper level of training in a council or a region or whatever, you're pretty far along in your scout career. And if you were ever active in a unit, it was probably a few years ago. But Bill was active in a unit for like ever. It was always sometime he was doing something with the unit. And if you ever had any conversations with him, his thinking originally was not about, knife and axe. His thinking was, how do I help these kids grow up? And he was one of the first people probably in this area who had an integrated unit. Some black kid wandered in with a buddy one day and said, can he join our troop? And the answer was yes. Okay? So he did a lot of thinking and a lot of, and if all of you, I'm sure, have spent some time with people, with kids in units, that's a pretty easy job, right? You want to get a bunch of 11-year-old boys to grow up. That's a really hard job. That's almost harder than being their parents, but not quite, because you're stuck with them with your parents. But that job is a very hard job if you take it at face value. I want these young men to learn to work together, to stand for some ethical principles, to be good citizens, to understand that we're all better if we're helping. That's pretty hard. Now, Boy Scout program gives you the opportunity. It works pretty well if you do it the right way. But first of all, I don't think Bill ever forgot, and I suspect he sneaks back into a meeting every now and then just to feel better, ever forgot the impact you can have on 11, 12, 13-year-old boys. And don't get me wrong, I have nothing wrong, no problems with as many girls that want to join the Scouts BSA as they want to. If they all, 100% of them become Eagles, I'm happy with that. I'll just tell you my personal opinion after studying it for 25 or 30 years is girls mature earlier than boys, and they don't need the Boy Scouts quite like our little 11-year-old Rugrats do. And if we hang them in there, if we get them to stay, they become different people. And Bill knew that I believe, from his early experience working with young people. Now, the second part I'm guessing at, he had to also have the perspective to interact with people from the other experimental councils about what is leadership all about, what is management all about, and how do we do that. So I suspect at least some of that comes from the fact that he was a senior manager at DuPont. Yeah, that place where all you guys work. At DuPont. And so, I think it would have been hard if you had been, a person who did a blue-collar job, nothing wrong with blue-collar jobs, but would have been harder to think about leadership and management if he hadn't had other experiences. And of course, I had not forgotten, but was reminded, he served in the Army after World War II. I served in the Army in Vietnam. That has some impact. The Army has a way of providing leadership, and it also does a really good thing, if you've never heard this story. If you're a young officer, particularly second and first lieutenants, you know how hard it is to fail? The Army believes in you so much that you have a senior non-commissioned officer assigned to you. So when I was a company commander in Vietnam and had never been a company commander, sort of couldn't spell it, I had a first sergeant who'd been in the Army 15 years. And my boss said, "You're getting a good first sergeant, and I'm not telling you what to do, but you better have a real good reason for ignoring his advice." So Bill would have gotten that experience too. So here we have now, let me just give you the quicker story, hopefully. 5 councils, they're holding different courses every year, they're turning them back in, they're getting written up to a new syllabus. And by 1973, a couple of regions have done one in 72, but by 73, every course is supposed to be a leadership development course. The BSA had never done anything like this before. So you might wonder how that happened. There's a little bit of it in the book. If you want more information, you can just Google White Stag Junior Leader Training, because it came out of a junior leader course that was put together in Monterey, California. And when the Boy Scouts got wind of it, they sent a guy named John Larson out there to check it out. And they began to discuss it and finally decided, yes, we ought to teach leadership schools. And number 2, we ought to put it in Woodbridge. And so Bill, I think, was uniquely positioned to have an incredibly important impact. And it's my belief that he did. And I say that for 2 reasons. First of all, I believe most of the other people who did the experimental courses went on to do other things. He stayed engaged. He was holding Woodbridge course director conferences in the early 70s and later. And for a while, he was making it easy for us in Washington because it was at a what was it, the 4-H conference center in north part of Washington. And you had to be there to appreciate it, because the leadership development course was designed for you to try to be sure your boys, your leaders, understood their capability and could engage the capability, judge and engage the capability of other leaders. And so we used a lot of questions in those days. Rather than saying, let me tell you what the rule is when it's time to communicate, we would say, why don't your patrol get together and list all the different ways you can communicate, and which ones are easiest to use, and which ones can you use better with boys, and so on and so on. It was a little bit of a lengthy process, but it forced people to think. You couldn't just sit there and make a few notes and take a test at the end of the class. And I distinctly remember, I was telling Dave earlier today, one of our famous wood badge coordinators in Washington was a guy named Larry Liston. And Larry was a wonderful scouter, and he loved wood badge, but he went all the way back to the time when he was out with the cavemen sharpening stones and stuff. And so it was a little hard to bring him into leadership development. And so I remember specifically one time, Bill was not above changing the subject and throwing a new question out if he saw the need, the opportunity for it. So I remember one time, I don't know how it came up, but he said, we're all here because we like scouting, but we're here because we get something from this program. Now that doesn't sound necessarily wrong. I think most of us today would agree with that. But what in fact Larry Liston took it to mean is, oh, so you think we're all selfish, eh? I don't agree with that at all. So we just about had a little argument, and Bill backed off a little bit. And I chuckled because I was sure most everybody in the room knew what Bill had been trying to say. Yeah, we do it for the kids. Yeah, we do it because it's good. Yeah, because we like to go camping. Yeah, because the wife wants us out of the house. But we also do it because it meets a need of our own. And that's right. And it's a good thing to know if you are in fact trying to work with volunteers and scouting. So let me go on. This whole thing in 73 got kicked off, and we used that syllabus essentially from 73 to 02, because we didn't use the 21st century till 01, because we used the 21st century starting in 02. And we changed it eventually because we saw some things in a Order of the Era training course that for young people that we thought had some better implementation and participation ways. There were more videos, there was more role playing. So that was the change there. And then the most recent course, Dave and I served on the task force that finished up in 2019 and was mandatory in 2020. Again, I think modification more than a major change from leadership development. In my opinion, leadership development has made a major difference in the Boy Scouts of America since 1973. And if there's a single person that you can point to say, he's the one who made it happen, it's Bill Whisler. There's no doubt in my mind. Lots of other people did good things and did supportive things, but they didn't have the position and the tenure that he had to have that impact. So when we got together in Dallas in 2015 to start this task force, there wasn't any discussion about whether we should have leadership skills. The question was, how are we presenting them? Do we encompass the ones that are most useful for scout leaders and so on? So Bill was my mentor, and I remember the first time we talked about wood badge, he said, so they want you to be the course director, and I said, yeah. He said, have you served on staff? I said, yeah. Served on 2 staffs in Atlanta of the old Scoutcraft skills, and then I served on a Region 6 and a national course at SHIF, and so I have some experience with leadership development. That doesn't mean I'm as good as I need to be, but it does mean I'm a little more experienced than almost everybody in our 4 councils. So he allowed us out. Maybe that would be okay. But he was going to assign what we then call a staff counselor. Today they're called mentors. And he said, so I got John Farquhar, who's really experienced at this, and I want John to be your staff counselor. And so John and I get in touch. He's somewhere in Delmarva, and I'm over in Charlottesville. And he said, I'm going to be real busy here for the next few months. Let's see if we can mail cassettes back and forth, and I'll give you some questions, and you can respond and mail them back and so on. So we did a little bit of that. It wasn't quite the same as sitting at Bill Whisler's footsteps and listening, but it got me on my toes. And luckily there were a couple of older, more experienced, not experienced in wood badge, but experienced in scouting guys on the staff, so that worked out all right. So let me see. So at least from 73 to 82, and Bill probably knows this is longer, we changed the size of the region in 82. The 5 councils up here in the north were moved from what was then southeast into northeast. So that kind of changed the layout of what Bill was doing, but he was still very, very much engaged. And the other 2 things he gets a lot of credit for, as far as I'm concerned, is we were not very far along, probably 74, 5, 6. And Bill said, time to start figuring about leadership skills in junior leader training. And so that was the start of what today we call NYLT. Had a different name earlier, but again, if we can teach it to adults, we can teach it to kids, and we should teach it to kids. And what did Bill say? Having worked as much as he did at a unit level, it's a lot harder to teach it to kids using other kids. You got to really train up your senior kids to do the good job that will both teach and inspire the younger kids. But he was the lead at that, because he had done a lot of JLT stuff, and he knew how important it was to teach kids at the unit level if they're going to learn. And then the other thing was, and I did manage to put this in the book, Bill was the one who said it's time to start thinking about weekend courses. Because in the 70s, mid-70s, 77, we were still running week-long courses. And as you can imagine, it was hard to get people to go for a week at a time. But I always warn people, you should have been there for the first one. It was 12 days if you want to go do Baden Powell's and Gilwell. So a little bit better to doing what we're doing. So Bill took advantage of some of the talent over in National Cap, and our coordinator at the time was Clayton Hitch. And Clayton did the first of the weekend courses. And so that got that started down the road. Now, I'll have to tell you, this is my personal opinion. I don't speak for anybody but Ken Davis. 2 weekends is barely enough. 1 weekend with only 2 days is not enough. Okay? We got to figure that one out, because when we came out of the last experimental relook and published the course for 2020, somebody, and we never hear for sure, but somebody's, and it's typically a few councils that keep thinking that they'll be saved if everybody would leave them alone and not take their wood badgers away. But I will just tell you, the course we offer now is high quality, and we're cramming it into 4 or 5 days, and it's just pretty hard to do. So that I would like to think we'll continue to look at. But my report to you, my belief, having studied this a good bit and having talked to Bill a lot and learned a lot from him over the years, is the training that we have available at the adult level in Wood Badge in the Boy Scouts of America today, we can trace directly to William D. Whisler. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Bob is truly sorry he can't be here. He tried several days even before the hurricane came in to get a flight, but every flight he got seemed to get canceled. So he asked me to step in for it. Bob and I have been working many, many months with Bill to develop and organize his collection that will eventually go into the museum and the training center. So Bob and I have worked very closely together. Bill is a very, very old friend. I was a course director, and I wouldn't have been a course director if it hadn't been for Bill. Bill has a very subtle way, and sometimes not so subtle way, of mentoring you, of pushing you along, and making you do things that you really didn't think maybe you could do. But he's very good at that. So I'm going to read what Bob has written. So here we go. I am sorry I'm not able to attend this function because I am stranded in Florida. Bill, you have been a great friend, mentor, and teacher. I value the many hours we have spent together. I am sure speakers have related their experiences with you as an adult scout. But you must tell them about your expectations of their performance of that job. Some 20 years later, Scoutmaster Bill Whisler wrote a personal handwritten letter to each new scout who joined his troop. Guess what? It described his expectations of that boy's performance in scouting and his personal life. I am certain that Bill would not mind if I share a copy of one of those letters with you. You mind, Bill? Bob was right, huh? Troop 43 BSA. Number 1, the scout oath is taken forever to live 24 hours a day at church, home, school, and scouts and elsewhere. You do not pledge to be perfect, but to do your best. Number 2, Troop 43 oath. On my honor, I, Pat Weaver, promise to do my best to make myself the best scout, my patrol the best patrol, and my troop, Troop 43, the best troop in scouting. Number 3, if you cannot attend a meeting or will be late, call your patrol leader. Attendance is expected unless for cause. Remember, your scout work comes first. Number 4, be in proper scout uniform at all scout meetings, unless instructed otherwise. Number 5, be a woodsman. Never kneel or sit on unprotected ground, squat or prepare a seat. Number 6, Troop 43 sleeps or is quiet from taps through reveille so others may sleep. Number 7, Troop 43 hikes into a campsite and then they hike out. Number 8, play the game fairly to win, but when you lose, be the first to congratulate and cheer the winner. Number 9, develop self-discipline. Pass the tests awesome of a well-educated man. 1, to do what you have to do. Number 2, when you have to do it. Number 3, whether you like it or not. Number 10, Troop 43 has high standards. We expect you to be above average. Our reputation is our most priceless possession. We know you will not sully it. Every kid got one. And this one, I think Bill will. This one was given to Bob after Bill found it in his son's desk. Let me get the right page. Bob says he could go on for hours about the things I admire about Bill, but my time is limited. I simply want to thank Bill for being my friend and look forward to the ribbon cutting on the William D. Bill Whisler Council Training Center. This is Bob Stakowitz, and I'll count my blessings too, sir.
now for a presentation. I'd like to invite all speakers up on stage, and I'd like to invite Bill as well up on stage. Robert, I lost you, Robert. If you're available to come up on stage, Pat Press. Pat, you may not know, got onto an airplane in the Philippines a few hours ago, got off the airplane just a couple of hours ago, and is now joining us, which is great, as council president.
Now you probably wonder what scout executives do. They help old people up the steps.
You got the only 2 salt chairs.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
Get it away from the edge.
And by the way, anybody who might have a camera is welcome to take any photos you might want to
Hand or
take.
anything?
As long as they don't end up in the post office.
Thank God. Chairs.
We situated again? Excellent.
Get on with it.
Get on with it. Well, I thought I got 15 minutes or something. Something like that.
How about that?
Oh,
I was trying to hide behind them.
It's hard to say. You sure you want all of us to be seen?
So this has been a great afternoon, evening, getting reacquainted with old friends, meeting some new folks, honoring our good friend Bill Whisler and hearing some stories about him. It's been awesome. Thanks for being here and recognizing Bill's distinguished service of scouting. So once the training center is complete, there will be a permanent plaque on the wall there that'll list all the folks that helped make it possible. So if you donate to this naming event, your name will appear there as well. Bill, we'd like to recognize your dedicated service to scouting by presenting you this plaque. Pat's going to do it.
Somebody needs to read it.
See you too. Bill, the plaque says, for 82 years of service dedicated to scouting, Delmarva Council commits to create the William D. Whisler Training Center, and it's dated October 1st, 2022. Congratulations. Our William D. Whisler Training Center. Bill Whisler Training Center.
You missed,
We'll figure that out for the actual plaque that hangs in the training center. How's that?
you missed one of the earlier speakers.
Oh, sorry. I came late. I would have rather been here, I assure you.
Glad you got back.
So I'll turn it over to Robert. He has a few words to share with us.
Just want to thank Bill for his dedicated years of service and to be able to be a part of this event this afternoon, evening, to recognize him for really a lifetime of service to the Delmarva Council and the Boy Scouts of America. And what more appropriate than to have a training center named after him, after hearing from so many individuals about the legacy that he's had in training. And I know training is such a critical component of what we do in scouting, because without training and trained volunteers, we don't have consistent programs. And those consistent programs is what keeps our kids in the program so that we can deliver the mission of this program. I forget what training it was, whether it was a camp school or wood badge or whatnot. There was a presenter that came up and they shared the value of training. And we would never think of boarding a plane with a pilot that hasn't been trained. And yet, far too often, we put kids in the hands of a scoutmaster, a scout leader that has never been trained. And here we have a gentleman that, as I heard today, provided leadership to over 100 wood badges. And if you average 40 participants per wood badge, that's over 4,000 leaders that serve another 40 kids each, and then not to mention how many of those individuals eventually became a scoutmaster of a wood badge, and the legacy just goes on. It was mentioned earlier about a pebble dropping into a pond and that ripple effect going who knows where. But the legacy this man has left for us, and to be able to continue by having a training center in his namesake, is going to be huge for our posterity and these youth that's coming on after us and the leaders that we have coming in. So I'd like to encourage all of us to go back and get more leaders trained so we can continue to deliver quality programs that retain our kids so we can deliver the mission of this wonderful program. So Bill, thank you for your legacy and the leadership that you've set for all of us in the importance in training.
Bill, you can sit there and use this or stand, whatever
I'll
you want.
stand, but I need my speech.
Oh, well, I don't know.
I preached a sermon one time in our church about what they were going to say at your funeral. And now I know. I'd like to recognize some of the members here tonight. Our Canadian contingent, Don Jim, and our South Carolina contingent, Barbara Hicklin, who I now call Grandma. And the new birthday girl, and Nancy Jones, who's a member of the committee, and the course director, and a little older than she was then.
Don't dare tell them how.
First, I thank God for allowing me to live long enough to attend this event. I also want to recognize my wife Katie's support of my scouting service throughout the 73 years of our marriage. Thanks to Dave Short and his committee for organizing this event, and to Bruce Simmons for arranging the program. I want to thank all who have contributed money for the Consul Training Center, but also recognize the legacy of each of your scouting service. Drop a pebble in scouting's pond, and no one knows how many have been and will be affected by your legacies. I know each of you have affected me. I know some have heard part of what I'm going to say, but each of us have a limited number of events that have shaped our lives. I joined scouting, as you have heard, in 1937 at age 10. I was supposed to be 12, but the scoutmaster was an untrained church member. I do not remember his name, but he greatly influenced my life. During the Scoutmaster Conference for Tenderfoot, he said, "You have promised to live the Scout Oath by doing your best." He said, "Who knows if you're doing your best?" And I said, "Well, you and my parents." He said, "No, Bill, only you and God know if you're doing your best." Then he said, "No one is perfect." That made sense to me then and throughout my life, as I've tried to set the example of always doing my best. Once in a while I've failed, and each failure hurts. A year later, the 13 members of Troop 6 had a contest to make something with knife and axe. We then voted the next week for whose project was the best. The vote was 12-1. The Scoutmaster asked if I had voted for myself. I said I had. He said, "Well, you know, that's poor Scout spirit." That really hurt me because the winner had cheated by using a jigsaw instead of knife and axe. I said the winner cheated and I quit. And I went home in tears. Several months later in October, my best friend Herb and I were sitting on our cold front steps. Herb got on his bicycle and said he's going to join the Boy Scouts. I joined him since I didn't want to sit on the steps alone. When we got to the troop meeting, there was a new scoutmaster, Adrian Decker, and 38 scouts having fun. Mr. Decker had high standards and he held an inspection on something different every meeting. This night he said he would inspect hands, probably because he saw that I had a problem of chewing my nails really quick. I thought I'm in now because I passed tenderfoot already. And he said there'd only be 2 more till we got to 40. The others would have to go to Troop 1. Mr. Decker came to me. I held out my hands and he said, turn them over. Then he said one more sentence. Bill, we do not bite our nails in Troop 6. My nails have not been bitten since that night 82 years ago. Because I did not want to miss on the fun in Troop 6. I stayed in Troop 6 for 6 years, made Eagle Scout in December of 1942, and then earned 4 pounds before I joined the Army. 2 scoutmasters, one a rather poor one who with a question and a statement of a few words set the standard for my living the scout oath that made sense to me as a 10-year-old and throughout my life. The second, an excellent scoutmaster with high personal standards, set the example that has also affected me throughout my life. And so it is with this character factory, the character factory we call scouting. After coming to Delaware in 1950 to work at DuPont, I served in various scout positions until 1954 when I founded Cup Pack 8 and served as Cup Master for 2 years. Then I founded Troop 43 and served as Scoutmaster when my son, Bill Jr., bridged over from the pack to the troop. He said he was going to be the first Eagle Scout in Troop 43. In 1942, he had 21 merit badges, and the application for Eagle Scout needed to be signed. Since I was his father, I told him my assistant scoutmaster and his mother would be the signers. My assistant signed and I took the papers to his mother. She said, Bill, Eagle Scout means something in this family. Our standards are high, and I do not like some of your attitudes and actions recently. I will not sign until you do better living the Scout Oath of Law. Several months later, Bill Jr. became the second Eagle Scout in the troop on December 12, 1962, exactly 20 years later from when I passed the board review. 55 years later at age 70, when Bill was dying of brain cancer, he told his older sister, who was his caretaker for the last year of his life, of the situation and finish by saying, Mama was right. Now, in 1965, I became a staff member of the old Region 3, it was R34 in Delmont, Valley Forge Consul. And one of the patrol members, a member of the Owl Patrol, was Dave Short's father. So I don't know if Dave turned out all right or not, but maybe I had some influence with his father. His father's 99, and I guess according to Dave, he's doing well. So it was mentioned that I was involved in 100 wood badge courses. I did not attend all those. I only attended 39. And now I can't attend anymore. If you look on my table before you leave, you will see what a Reddy Fox looks like at age 95. It's not a pleasant thing to look at. And it's probably not a pleasant thing to look at me. So anyhow, again, I'd like to thank each of you for coming, and for each of you with the legacy that you've made affecting the Scouts, many of whom you will never know. By the time, as Robert said, you multiply each troop by 30 or 40, and if 10 of them become Scoutmasters, there's another 30 or 40 or 300 or 400, and then there's 10% of those, and you actually will be affecting millions. Now, the ones that didn't know you personally will base their actions on what their Scoutmaster who did know you personally, and that's the way it gets passed on. So, once again, thanks for everything. It's a great council, and a great thing to see the friends here from Canada and the southern part of the United States, South Carolina. And these ladies have all served, as you men have, and it's been a great night. Thanks for everything.